It is my pleasure to welcome our panel for this evening. We are joined by Nerissa Scott, Australian spokeswoman for Save Women's Sport Australasia, and dual Olympian and Australian spokeswoman and ambassador for Save Women's Sport Australasia, Deborah Lovely Atkinson. I hope I got that right. Welcome to the show, girls, if I'm still allowed to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Well, Nerissa, let me start with you. The whole topic of women's rights when it comes to the inclusion of biological men in various sex-protected spaces was trending at the top of the news cycle for a short time. Now, while we saw thousands of women marching in the streets for the hashtag #MeToo movement, barely a handful showed up to keep women's sport fair. Now, you're lucky if you see it in the news cycle at all. It's as if it's just disappeared entirely. Is there a sense that this idea of the gender disparity in sports and men in our spaces, has that become a foregone conclusion in the Australian political environment?
Well, I think, unfortunately, there's just so much money being thrown at this that it's very difficult to combat. So when you've got organisations like ACON, formerly the AIDS Council of New South Wales, with $25 million government funding every single year, pushing this agenda and this messaging, it's, as I said, it's difficult for grassroots organisations, volunteer organisations like Save Women's Sports Australasia to combat. And our governments are just very determined, the current Labor governments in Australia are very determined to get this agenda accepted in Australian society, that trans women are women and that men should be playing in women's sport.
Well, Deborah, none of this is good news for women in sport and girls in sport. I mean, effectively, the Labor state governments are in the process of promoting a put up or shut up mentality. We've got a quick clip for our viewers here just to show you what's going on with our government. Now, the Victorian government seems to be trying to make society feel sorry for biological men who want to compete against women because, I guess, how dare women complain? What's going on with women's sport from your perspective? Is it just going to get any better or is this it now?
Yeah, look, my understanding is that a lot of sports have felt that they have to accept certain policies in order to get their government funding. And I think in order to be inclusive, I think a lot of people have just accepted that this is how it is. And unfortunately, it's just actually not fair for women to compete against men in sport. And I feel like if there's adverts trying to make women accept men into competitions, that sends a pretty strong message, in my opinion.
Well, the whole idea that, don't complain, this is for, if you complain, you're being nasty or being mean. Is it just me, Deborah, or are women more susceptible to that messaging than men? Because women seem to be like, oh, I don't want to be putting up any kind of conflict or causing any stirs by this. Is that kind of messaging difficult for women to get past?
It is incredibly difficult. I was told to be very careful what I said before a Commonwealth Games competition when I did line up against a transgender athlete. I was concerned that I might have actually been removed from the village and not been able to compete if I did say anything about, anything negative on the topic. So it's really, really difficult to train so hard for so long in a male-dominated sport, particularly for myself in weightlifting, and then line up standing next to a man in the competition. That was incredibly confronting. And I just don't understand how people can think that that's a fair competition.
Well, particularly in weightlifting, I mean, it's not as if there are women lining up to compete against men as transgender in their competition. It's really only the women's sports that's being affected at this side. But Nerissa, women in Victoria are also being told that it's wrong for them to be wary of men. If they're dressed to present of women, they shouldn't be complaining about their safety. Here's a clip from a trans woman going into a lift with another woman. Now, to me, that's particularly disingenuous because I've never seen a woman leave a lift because a transgender person stepped in. It seems to me it's more about the scorn about women who don't want men in their bathrooms and their change rooms, but Jacinta Allen's government didn't want to make those ads. Are women being gaslit into accepting a dangerous situation in the name of diversity and inclusion?
100%, Alexandra. I mean, those ads, that the Unsaid campaign, what is it? The Unsaid says a lot. It's they're so bad that maybe a turf actually made them, because they're going to pick thousands more people because they're just horrendous, and the gaslighting is off the charts. If a woman wants to leave a lift because she feels unsafe or uncomfortable or any space that she's in, that's her right. And to frame that as transphobic is just disgusting, which is exactly what's happening with sport. Any women or girls who dare to say that it's unfair or unsafe to have men and boys in their sports, they're being ostracized, they're being punished, they're being not picked on the team. And as Deb mentioned, even in their contracts, there are clauses that gag female athletes from speaking out on this issue.
Well, not only that, I mean, forget the lift for a second. Basically, it seems to me the government is saying if you're a woman and you feel unsafe, it is impolite for you to do anything about your safety. You must stay in the situation in which you feel danger. I mean, I've left train carriages at night time when I'm on my own, and I don't like the look of the bloke in the train carriage with me. And is the government saying I should stay there because I'm making that bloke feel unwelcome if I don't accept them?
Yes, the man's feelings are more important than yours, and your safety and your comfort are not important.
Well, Deborah, I took a photograph of George Street the other day. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but there are trans flags every 50 paces on both sides of George Street, all the way down to the harbour. And if you keep going down to the harbour, you'll find this sports centre that's set up there for kids. Now, the kids are playing basketball under the shadow of two huge trans flags that are flying inside from the ceiling of the courts. Now, this incursion of aggressive sexual politics into the sporting sphere, where these kids are playing, concerns me. Do you think that it makes it more difficult for women to express their issues with men in their sports when they're having to play their sports underneath the trans flags?
That's a very confusing setup in my mind. And I mean, I began weightlifting as a 15-year-old, 14 actually, and then my first competition when I just turned 15 in a male-dominated sport, and people didn't like it at the time. Actually, my own grandmother didn't like it at the time, that I was playing a man's sport, and then it very quickly became accepted that women can do weightlifting too. After waiting 104 years to compete at the Olympic Games and waiting 52 years to have our own category, women competing at the Commonwealth Games, we finally broke through and was able to compete in a women's category sport. And yet 5 Commonwealth Games later, at my last, at 2018, I competed against a man. It's so confusing to know, why was I drug tested for 18 years of my sporting career to prove that I didn't have an advantage over other women to then line up against a man?
What is it like?
I'm not sure if you know about drug.
Well, I was going to say, what's it like being a woman?
Drug testing is quite.
What's it like being a woman when you go in there and you see a bloke, even if they're wearing a wig or whatever, but a bloke competing against you when you know they are heavier than you, they are stronger than you, they've got testosterone. What's it like doing that? How do you feel about your work up to that point when you see that?
Oh, I mean, it was incredibly confronting because we didn't actually know if it would happen right up until the day of competition. I think a lot of us were just generally waiting to see, would this actually happen? It was just such a confronting situation that I literally had to sit down and just tell myself to focus on my own competition, don't think about anything else. And I really, really, after 18 years of competing for my country, I had to actually give myself a talking to and just put it out of my mind, which was incredibly difficult, even as a seasoned athlete after 2 Commonwealth Games and 5 Olympics. Again, like I said, confusing to be drug tested, to have to urinate into a cup in front of someone watching me half naked for 18 years, to do that, to prove that I had no advantage over other women not taking drugs, and now to line up competing against a man. I was very deflated that all my training to this point really felt like, what was the point of all that, because I wasn't going to win the competition. It's disheartening and disempowering to know that I actually couldn't do anything about the situation. Yes, to look at someone a foot taller and around 40 kilos heavier than me, in the competition, having broken national records for another country as a junior male athlete. You just yeah, and on top of all that, feeling quite silenced, not being able to say anything.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be under the whole banner of the Be Kind ideology, but none of this sounds like it's being particularly kind to the majority of people who are trying to compete.